45 years ago. Still remember it like it was yesterday. Walter Ray, a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, had been interviewed by the LA Times. And Walter Ray, point blank, said that Ellen White was a plagiarist. Now, Walter Ray, in that interview with the LA Times, made it very obvious that he was not a Seventh-day Adventist. I was a junior theology major at Pacific Union College at that time in the spring of 1980. And I learned so much that day. And what I learned that day still plagues Seventh-day Adventism to this very day. All of my classmates who were all junior theology majors, we were all in the room, and the teacher of that class that day, it was in pastoral leadership, training young Seventh-day Adventist young men at that point. Now it'd probably be half men and half women. Elder Don Scully walked in late to class that day. And the first thing that Elder Scully said to these young men training to be Seventh-day Adventist ministers, he said, "Gentlemen," he said, "I'm sure you've all heard about the article in the LA Times." And we all had. And he said, "But it shouldn't surprise us, because we all know the problems with the spirit of prophecy." You could have heard a pin drop in that room. Nobody said a word. Nobody said a word. But then one student raised his hand. The student is in this room this morning. And the student said, "Elder Scully, I've been a Seventh-day Adventist for 2 years. Can you please explain to me the problems with Ellen White? I love her books, and I'd like for you to explain what the problems are." You would have thought a bomb was dropped in that room. He was standing in the forefront, in the front of the class. By the time I got done with that question, he had gone back at least 10 feet and was right up against the chalkboard. I'm not exaggerating, folk. That image of what happened in that room that day is as vivid as if it happened this morning. Well, he tried to pin circles to tell us how awful a plagiarist Ellen White was. And I kept saying, "Elder Scully, would you please make yourself a little clearer? Because I still don't see the problems with Ellen White." Well, folk, for me to have asked one question was deadly. To ask repeated questions, I might as well kiss my job opportunities to be an Adventist minister goodbye. What I learned in that room that morning was several things. Number one, you don't speak against the Adventist leadership, because if you do, you are a marked man. The second thing I learned that morning is that my possibility of becoming a Seventh-day Adventist minister just went right out the window. Because those men held my life in their hands, and my future and my job was in their hands. And they were going to use that to control me or destroy me. When we left the class that morning, if I took you to PUC, right, if we went to Pacific Union College right now, I think I could tell you where the classroom still is. And as you walk out the door, right there on your right was a bathroom. And I walked into the bathroom, and there was a young theology student in the bathroom that morning. And as I walked in, he looked at me and he said, "Bill," he said, "you know what?" I said, "Tell me." He said, "If you don't keep your mouth shut, you will never get a call into the Adventist ministry." There was something that young man learned that he communicated with me in the bathroom, didn't he? If you want a job in the Adventist church, in the Adventist ministry, you don't question those in leadership. You keep your mouth shut. And if you want to be guaranteed a paycheck, don't say a word. What kind of lessons were those to be teaching young Seventh-day Adventists who wanted to become ministers? You want to keep your job in the denomination? You do whatever the leaders tell you. Because if you don't, they'll take your paycheck and they'll say, "Now bow down or you'll never get another one of these again." The young man in the bathroom, he learned some lessons that morning, didn't he? He learned some lessons about how and what was necessary to become a Seventh-day Adventist minister within the denomination. Did the message come through? Did he communicate it to me? Oh, you bet he did. You bet he did. But you know what? I guess I have a hard head. Because 12 years later, working in the Northern California Conference as a pastor and a teacher, I ran into, in the church where I was teaching, I ran into a wealthy dentist who had done very well in the stock market. I still remember his name. It was Don Young. He was a nice man. He was a very wealthy man. But Don Young did not like to hear quotes from Ellen White. And Don Young did not like to hear about the sanctuary and the investigative judgment. And Don Young did not like to hear that it was still possible through faith in Jesus Christ to keep the law of God. He didn't want to hear that. But Don Young decided to come and participate in my Sabbath School class. And guess what? He heard those things. And he didn't like them. And he put a lot of money, folk. He put a lot of money into the Adventist Hill at that church in Red Bluff. He was a multi-millionaire dentist. And Don Young would sit in my Sabbath School class, and the following Monday or Tuesday of the next week, he would get on the phone. And he would call the Northern California Conference office. Can I have the Minister of Education, please? Passed over to Elder Ken Hutchins, or Floyd White, or Myron Whiting. And Don Young would say, you know what? We've got a teacher here at our school in Red Bluff, and you need to shut his mouth, or I'm not going to put any more money into your till. Deja vu. Same thing that happened in 1980 was happening again. And so I was called into the Northern California Conference office in 1992. And I was told, Bill, the parents love you. The children love you in the school. Everyone loves you. But you have to make us a promise in this room. I said, well, what promise do you want me to make? They said, you've got to promise us in this room that you will not teach or preach the three angels' messages in public. I looked at the man in shock. I said, Elder Hutchins, what do you want me to teach? He said, the love of God. I said, Elder Hutchins, that is the love of God. He said, Bill, I'm not here to quibble with you. You need to make a decision. Well, my wife and I made a decision. And the following Monday, I called and I said, I won't be working for you anymore. I learned something. I learned that I have a job in the denomination as long as I obey the leaders. As long as I am willing to sacrifice my conscience and only say what they want me to say, that I can keep a job. That's what I learned. And I also learned that the Bible and Ellen White are no longer the standards that run the denomination of Seventh-day Adventism. Those are not the principles that reign in Adventism anymore, folk. What reigns is, it's the pocketbook. It's the almighty dollar And the only way you get a piece of the Adventist dollar is if you do exactly as the leaders tell you to do it. And if you don't, you're gone. Now, when I was fired in 1992, I was told, we're going to demonize you. We are going to ostracize you. We are going to make it so you will never again preach the three angels' messages around this world. We will make it so you never do that again. I learned something. The Seventh-day Adventist leaders, they think they're God. They think that they own the cattle on 1,000 hills. I've had the opportunity to send literature to over 100 countries around the world. By the grace of God alone, I've traveled to every continent in this world except for Antarctica. And that's because I don't want to go there. God is still on his throne. God still has charge of his messages. But folk, there are two principles. There are two principles that are warring within Seventh-day Adventism. And the one principle has taken over. And that principle is this. Two things, actually. If you want to rise in Seventh-day Adventism, you obey the leadership. And you don't buck them, because if you do, you're gone. And if you want a piece of the Adventist pie, the money pie in Seventh-day Adventism, the only way you get a piece is to obey what your leaders tell you to do. It's no longer about truth, friends. It's no longer about truth. It's about money. It's about position. It's about power. With that introduction, we're going to look at this man, Erton Kohler, bought and sold. COVID rocked the world, didn't it? I almost died. I almost died. A doctor looked at my x-rays. My daughter was standing next to the doctor. She is a nurse. He said, "Well, that guy's dead." My lungs were completely full of COVID. "That guy's dead." My daughter turned to him and said, "Sir, he is alive and well, and he'll be leaving the hospital soon." The doctor said, "He must have an immune system of a horse." No. It's that same boy that was at PUC that loved the writings of Ellen White, that believed that the health messages that she taught were worthwhile to follow. That's why I'm here today, because of those health principles in the spirit of prophecy. So if some guy, I don't care what his title is, I don't care what his name is, if he says, well, we know the problems with Ellen White, well, you know what? The same guy that disagreed in that classroom that day is going to disagree 1,000 times more, folk. 1,000 times more. No area of the world was left unaffected. Nations, churches, our lives were all hit by this terrible illness. Something about this time remains locked in our minds and will never go away. I'll never forget COVID, friends. I'll never forget it and what happened. And in Seventh-day Adventism, that's the case. That's the case. Many Adventists died. Many lost their health. Many lost their homes over their refusal to participate in the government's remedy for this crisis. Folk, I had Adventists all over America calling me and saying, can you give us a letter of exemption? And I said, well, where do you go to church? Well, I go to the Seventh-day Adventist church in such and such an area. And I'd say, well, did you ask your pastor for a letter of exemption? They said, oh, yeah, I did, but they wouldn't give it to me. And I said, well, did you call your conference office? Well, of course I did, and they wouldn't give it to me either. And did you call the general conference? They wouldn't give it to me either. And so I asked myself a question that I asked the person on the phone. Why? Why didn't they write letters of exemption on the grounds of liberty of conscience and a desire to keep our bodies pure and clean? Why didn't the General Conference come to the aid of Seventh-day Adventists who have been supporting that church for decades? Some Seventh-day Adventists couldn't conscientiously participate in the government's solution for COVID-19 because of their religious convictions regarding their body as the temple of God. They couldn't follow government mandates. As a result, many lost their jobs. I had people in New York. I knew probably 3 or 4 people in New York alone that called me and said, we can't pay our mortgage. What are we going to do? And the Adventist church would not help them. Wouldn't help them. When these conscientious Adventists appealed to their local church or to the General Conference for religious exemption letters, they were refused. For some reason, the denomination would not protect its members. Why? Why? June 6th through June 11th of 2022, there was a General Conference meeting in St. Louis. And this man right here, Jonathan Zirkle, he lives in Loma Linda. He's a lawyer. Jonathan Zirkle made a motion that the General Conference's position on COVID-19 and their response to members be discussed. He made a motion, and it was seconded. So according to Robert's Rules of Order, that issue should have been discussed. And the issue Jonathan Zirkle was concerned about, he said, I have a petition signed by 25,000 Seventh-day Adventists all over the world, 1,900 delegates or pastors, and over 4,000 healthcare providers, all wanting to know why the church took the stand it did and refused to help the members. That was the motion. Yes. He stood for something. He stood for something. I'd like to meet him. At that point, at the General Conference session, this man right here, Ted Wilson, rose to his feet. Now, folk, Seventh-day Adventists, some were in hospitals because they took the vaccine. Some people lost their jobs. Some people couldn't pay their mortgages because of the church's position. This wasn't a willy-nilly, fly-by-night issue. This was a very personal, a very hurtful issue for Seventh-day Adventists. And Jonathan Zirkel said, we need to discuss this. There are Seventh-day Adventists hurting because of what the church has done. Ted Wilson at that moment rose to his feet. He said several things. I'm not going to repeat them, and I'm only going, you can go back and watch the video. It's for anybody who wants to see it. But Ted Wilson gets up and he says, I know there's been a motion made, and I know that it's been seconded. And then he said, but I urge this group of people not to discuss this issue. So people are bleeding, but there's no Band-Aid you're going to provide. People are losing their homes. You're not going to help them. Why, friends? Why? Why? The issue was troubling to thousands of Adventists. They wanted to know why their church that they loved and had financed for many years had failed to come to the aid of fellow Adventists in a time of crisis. They wanted and needed answers to this most perplexing situation. Ted Wilson acknowledged the motion, seconded. He then proceeded to tell everyone present he would strongly urge this issue to not be discussed. The hope of resolution for many Adventists died. However, the church's position did not. Now, friends, how many Adventist delegates were in St. Louis? There were over 1,900, almost 2,000. Most of them were conference employees, pastors. Ted Wilson says, we aren't going to do it. How did they respond? Yeah, they responded exactly how you just responded. They didn't say a word. Why not? Why not? There's a video of the General Conference session in St. Louis about a month ago. And there's an interview with Conrad Vine and this young man. And the young man says, but Elder Vine or Dr. Vine, why don't the delegates address the leadership? Tell me why they don't, friends. What lesson did all of those pastors learn as they went through Adventist schools? What did they learn from their teachers at their Adventist universities? If you want a job, what do? You keep your mouth shut. You obey the leader, or your paycheck's going to be dissolved. Now, wait a minute. So who are we following now, friends? Who are we following? Are we following the Lamb whithersoever he goeth? Or are we following Ben Franklin wherever he goeth? Yeah, we're following Big Ben, aren't we? You know, I hear people say this to me all the time. They say, I say to people, look it, this is bold-faced apostasy. And you protest two ways. Number one, you frontally, in people's face, you demand answers. And when that doesn't work, you say, fine, until you give me answers, I'm not going to give you another dime. And the response from other, quote unquote, present truth pastors, their response is always, oh no, we can't do that. There's a lot of faithful pastors in the church. Well, tell me one of those faithful pastors that stood up when Jonathan Zirkel's motion was denied. How many pastors spoke up in the denomination and said, no, Elder Wilson, we're going to discuss it here and now? How many spoke up? Zero. None. None. Folk, the great bulk of Adventist ministers, they know the lesson. You keep your mouth shut. If the denomination says jump, you say, how high? They know, folk. They know how to play the game. I could play the game. I can play the game too. It's easy. But then you have to look yourself in the mirror when you're shaving, and you have to look and say, boy, you don't stand for anything, do you? All you stand for is a paycheck so that you can have nice health insurance, so you can put your kids through private schools, and you can live a nice life. That's all you stand for. Now, when Ted Wilson refused and said, we are not going to discuss this issue, he mentioned two names. He said, there are two fellow officers of mine who agree with me that this issue should not be discussed. Do you remember the names of the two people? That's right, John. Paul Douglas, the treasurer of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and Erton Kohler. Erton Kohler and Paul Douglas told Ted Wilson, do not discuss this issue in this General Conference session. Where else are you going to discuss it, friends? Where else will it be discussed? It won't be discussed. And Erton Kohler was one of the men who said, oh no, we're not discussing this here. So folk, Seventh-day Adventists are their jobs are being destroyed. Their health is being hurt. They can't pay their mortgages. Erton Kohler says, we're not going to help you. So what happened during the presidency of Ted Wilson is going to continue on in the presidency of Erton Kohler. Ted Wilson mentioned two names that were in total agreement with the church's stand not to give Adventist letters of exemption on the grounds of religious liberty, and who totally agreed with Ted Wilson not to discuss the issue: Paul Douglas and Erton Kohler. Friends, Erton Kohler has told us that his dad was a minister, and that he is a minister, and his son is a Seventh-day Adventist minister. And you know what all three of those men were taught as they were educated in Seventh-day Adventist schools? They were taught the same principles I was taught. You keep your mouth shut. You do exactly as the leaders tell you to do. And if you want a piece of the pie, if you want some of that Adventist pie, the only way you're going to eat it is if you're ready to sell your soul. Sell your soul for a pot of stew. These three men agreed not to defend Seventh-day Adventist religious liberty in a time of crisis. These three men agreed that there was something far more important than protecting the conscience of Seventh-day Adventists who couldn't follow government mandates for religious health reasons. Instead of standing with Seventh-day Adventists, these three men decided that something else superseded hurting Seventh-day Adventists. What could it possibly be? What could be more important? If you see a merchant on the side of the road on the way to Jericho, what are you going to do? Are you going to go to the hurting merchant, or are you going to protect yourself? For a people who have prized liberty of conscience and the stories of the faithful through the ages, who would rather die than surrender their beliefs, what these three men did was un-Adventist, unconscionable, and a downright betrayal. You know, folk, I hear people all the time say to me, "Oh, but they're our brethren. You need to love them." These are my brethren? They'd kick me down a gutter if I was hurting? That's my brother? No, that's not my brother. That's my enemy. Come on, folk. How long are we going to listen to present truth speakers? Oh, we need to love them. They're our brothers. We need to support them with our tithes. They're faithful. Faithful? This is faithful? This isn't. Folk, these are men that are living on a principle that says, I am going to get whatever I can get, and I don't care who I hurt on the way. That's the principle these people go by. These people aren't Seventh-day Adventist Christians, they're animals. That's how an animal acts, folk. I'm reading a book right now by a guy by the name of Paul Williams. It's called Operation Gladio. in which it talks about how Pope Paul VI and the mafia and the high-ups in the Office of Strategic Services became the CIA. You know what they did? For decades, from the late 1940s, and they're still doing it today. They are growing drugs, opium, heroin, in the Helmand Valley of Afghanistan. In the Helmand Valley of Afghanistan, they then bring those drugs to the United States and they sell them throughout America. You know where they started it all? It was in the ghettos of the big cities of America. New York, Detroit, Chicago, Miami, Houston. How many families in America have not been affected by what those animals did at the CIA, at the Vatican? How many American families have not been hurt by their garbage behavior, folk? How many? Would we call them our brothers too? Would we? I will guarantee you, I will never call these men in this slide my brothers. And if some present truth Adventist ministers don't get their act together, I won't be calling them my brothers either. So here we go, Ministry Watch. It's a website. You can go look it up. Empowering donors to Christian ministries. This is the board of ADRA, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency. Okay? ADRA, to help poor people, to help people in need. So here's the board. Well, let's see. Do we see any familiar names? Well, what do you know? Paul Douglas, board member of ADRA. Now, they meet, I've been told, about 4 times a year. Okay, 4 times a year. Now, I'm going to need a mathematician here to help me. 4 times a year, Paul Douglas gets $156,658. What's that come out to per board meeting, friends? Somebody help me. 37,000. Thank you, sir. Roughly 37,000. Would you like to walk into a room? How about this morning when you walked into this church? Would you have accepted it if I'd been at the door and I said, here's 37 G's? Would you have accepted that, sir? You sure would have, wouldn't you? That is nuts, folk. That's insanity. And folk will say, oh, I don't like the way Bill Hughes talks about people. Those are people? Adventists are hurting, and you're raking in $37,000 to sit in a boardroom for 1 hour? That's not people, folk. That's what an animal does. So who else was on ADRA for the last many years? There's Paul Douglas. Well, what do you know? Erton Kohler. Yeah, but he only makes $144,000 a year. So instead of making $37,000, he only makes, how much is that? 32, 33? Adventists can't pay their mortgage. Can't pay their mortgage. And Erton Kohler's rolling in over $130,000. Paul Douglas over $150,000. That's just on the board of ADRA. Just on the board of ADRA. Ted Wilson, what do you know? Have you ever heard that name before? What did Ted Wilson make, folk? $124,000? See, these three men, they learned their lessons well, didn't they? You want a piece of the pie? You want power and position? You do what your leader. Ted Wilson did, folk. That's what Erton Kohler has done. Erton Kohler's bought and sold. For Seventh-day Adventists who know that down toward the end of this earth's history there would be a crisis and religious liberty would be trampled underfoot. People's convictions would no longer matter, conform or else. What could possibly have led these men to trample on the consciences of fellow Adventists and allow them to lose their home, their health, and some their lives? The decision of Wilson, Douglas, and Kohler is stunning. Why? To this day, the question's never been answered. And of course, then when I start demanding or writing letters to various present truth ministers, why don't you say something? Why don't you call these men out? Oh no, we can't do that. It might hurt our ministry. Oh no, I can't do that. Some Adventist who's got a deep pocket might not give me the same amount of money they're giving me. Folk, in present truth ministry today, it's the same principle right across the board. Right across the board. You better be real careful who you're listening to. You better be real careful, folk. Because if you're listening to present truth pastors who are telling you, oh, you got to stay in the church. Oh, you got to pay your money in the church. Oh, you can't call out Adventist leadership, at least not by name. That's terrible. You better be careful who you're listening to, folk. Because we've got a lot of present truth Adventist ministers who are nothing more than conference pastors. That's what they are. So ADRA was getting millions of dollars from the UN. Seventh-day Adventists are getting millions of dollars from the UN. So if the UN was a part of the health mandates during COVID, would the Adventist church say, oh no, we're not going to follow those mandates, that's against our conscience? Well, of course they wouldn't, because they want the money to keep flowing. Keep bringing the money in from the UN. We got to keep the money flowing. So the principle on which the denomination is based today, that's why Adventists were kicked under the bus during COVID. It's the same with why the health systems of Seventh-day Adventists didn't protect their employees during COVID. The Adventist health systems, Advent Health in Florida, Kettering in Ohio, Adventist Health to Loma Linda. I'll bet there's some doctors that could tell horror stories about how they were forced to follow government mandates during COVID. Why? Because Loma Linda was getting millions of dollars. Millions of dollars. Do you think Loma Linda's going to shut off that pipe, friends? No, they're not. Why? Because they're not based on a principle of truth. No, they're not based on that anymore, friends. They're based on a principle that says money is our God. They make billions of dollars a year, all these Adventist health systems. Of those funds, the great bulk of the revenues come from Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance companies. But the great bulk is from Medicare and Medicaid, folk. Besides these funds taking care of the health systems, funds are given to subsidize Adventist schools and are used to pay healthy sums of money to church leaders that sit on the boards of these medical institutions. I wonder how much Ted Wilson got for sitting on the Loma Linda Medical Center board. I wonder how much he made. Funds are also allocated to pay leaders for family trips to Europe, boats in the Pacific, and weekend getaways. When COVID hit and Medicare and Medicaid were in support of the shots offered, Adventist hospitals and health systems and church leaders knew that if they didn't go along with government programs, they would be cut off from receiving the funding, and the Adventist health systems would disappear. And not only the health systems, but the Adventist school systems would disappear as well. I was sharing some of this information recently on a prayer line, and somebody said to me, but Pastor Bill, we know that the church may appear as about to fall, but it doesn't fall while the sinners in Zion are sifted out. And I said, let me guarantee you that a system that is built on money-grubbing people who all they care about is money and position and power, I said, that's not going through to the kingdom. That is not the church that God raised up. The church that God raised up are people who love the truth and love Jesus and will follow him wherever he goes. That's the church, and that's what's going through. I said, this apostasy at Loma Linda, this apostasy at Adventist Health Systems, this apostasy in Silver Springs, Maryland. Friends, this is the new organization that Ellen White said would happen at the end of time. It's an organization that's not built on truth. It's built on making money. That's not God's system, friend. That's a system of a new order that Ellen White said would happen. It's not going through to anywhere but to the lake of fire. Would the church protect its members who are being forced to accept government mandates, or would they go along with the government program to ensure the flow of money into the coffers of Adventist Health? Would they come to the defense of members whose consciences were being trampled on, or would they protect their free trips and their boats in the Pacific? Adventist liberty of conscience was sacrificed in the name of keeping the money flowing. The church leaders refused to admit this, but those are the facts, folks. Those are the disgusting, miserable facts. Since the 1980s, Seventh-day Adventism has joined the United Nations as an NGO or a non-governmental organization. In this role, the denomination has consultative status. They sit in on meetings. But in this role, they must go along with the UN agenda for the world. If they don't, millions of dollars would cease to flow via ADRA into the church. Friends, do you realize what that means? Do you know what the UN stands for? The UN, folk, spiritualism, they stand for the climate change agenda of the deceased Francis. Friends, the heart of the climate change agenda is Sunday. That's what the climate change agenda is. And the UN supports that. And ADRA supports that. And Ted Wilson and Erton Kohler and Paul Douglas support that. Friends, when a Sunday law comes, what do you think Erton Kohler and Paul Douglas and Ted Wilson, who all their lives have lived the principle of you do what you're told to keep the money flowing. What are they going to do when a Sunday law comes, friend? They're going to urge us to keep Sunday. That's what they're going to do, the first day of the week. That's what they're going to do, friends. And how about those faithful Adventist ministers? What are they going to do too, who have built their lives on the same principle? Are they going to protect their job, or are they going to protect their people? What are they going to do, friends? Wow. The UN wants to help end poverty by 2030. We can agree with that. However, the UN is pushing illegal immigration of masses of people into countries. ADRA was and is part of this. ADRA receives millions of dollars from the UN for this purpose. ADRA supports the UN, France's climate change agenda. The heart of the climate change is Sunday, and Ellen White in Great Controversy 589 and 590 says that it would be the climate issue that would bring in Sunday worship. And Seventh-day Adventists, quote unquote, they're not Adventists, but they would go right along with Sunday laws. Adventist leaders would not discuss the COVID issue and the church's response to its members because that kept the money flowing. Kohler, Wilson, and Douglas would see to that. Kohler's election guaranteed that the denomination would remain tied to the money coffers of the UN and Medicare. When another crisis comes, whether health or morally related, like a Sunday law, Kohler and his cronies will throw Adventists under the bus again to keep the money flowing. Whenever moral questions are answered by money, morality becomes a relic in the rear-view mirror. Friends, the Adventist entire system is built on position, power, and wealth. The entire principle on which that system stands. Well, in Erton Kohler's first sermon, he spoke a lot about boldness. Being bold, standing for something, standing for the Lord. I want to read two quotes to you that he made in Spectrum magazine, July 7, 2025. Listen carefully. I will be open to talk, okay, this is on women's ordination and human sexuality. I will be open to talk with everyone, but I will be faithful to the Bible. All those conversations will be related to our message and our identity and our trust in the Word of God. All of those who are available to align their lives with the Bible, I will be open to talk with them. The church belongs to all. I understand we are diverse. We represent cultures, languages, genders, and many other things, and I believe I need to be the leader of all of them. Not only a portion of the church, but the entire church. But as the leader of God's church, I need to be faithful to His revelation, and I would like to guide my leadership based on the Bible, and always be open to dialogue. Now, I'd like to ask you a question. What in the world did he just say? Thank you, ma'am. That's exactly right. What did he say? I have no idea what he thinks about women's ordination. I have no idea, and that was the question. And yet he talks at the general conference about boldness? That's Erton Kohler, the new General Conference president. The church's place in ICE raids and immigration barriers. Here's another direct quote on where he stands. Okay? This is a very sensitive issue. We can't deal with this issue openly. As a church, we're looking for the best ways to be close to our brothers and sisters who are facing challenges. We need to respect the laws, but at the same time, we have brothers and sisters we need to protect, and we're looking for the best ways to do that. So, what did he just say? What position will Erton Kohler take on immigration barriers, on ICE raids? What position will he take? I don't know. This is serious, friend. I mean, thank you. It's NLP. This is talking out of both sides of the same mouth at the same time. So where's it all going, friends? You have a new organization. Let's read the bottom quote first. The enemy of souls has sought to bring in the supposition a great reformation was to take place among Seventh-day Adventists. This reformation would consist in giving up the doctrines which stand as the pillars of our faith and engaging in a process of reorganization. Reorganization. It's a new organization, folks. It's based on totally different principles. It's no longer based on the principles of the Bible and the spirit of prophecy and standing for something. No, now it's based on the principle of getting money and position and power. That's what the new organization's built on, friends. Were this to take place, what would result? The principles of truth God has given to the remnant church would be discarded. Does that happen? When a wealthy dentist in Red Bluff, California didn't like what I was saying, his money talked. Not the truth that was being presented. It was his money. Because they have a new organization now. It's built on money. That's all that they care about. The fundamental principles that have sustained the work for the last 50 years would be accounted as error. A new organization would be established. Books of a new order would be written. A system of intellectual philosophy would be introduced. You know, maybe that's what that is. Maybe that's intellectual philosophy. The founders of this system would go into the cities and do a wonderful work. The Sabbath would be lightly regarded as also the God who created it. Nothing would be allowed to stand in the way of the new movement. How much? Oh, but I'm a present truth pastor, and they'll listen to me. Will they? If you believe that, see me after this meeting. I've got a bridge in Brooklyn. I want to make you a deal. Folk, it says nothing will stand in the way of this new movement. So we have a choice. Are we going to go with the new movement? Are we going to support the new movement? Are we going to stay in a church in that new movement? Are we going to obey whatever the pastor and the leaders say, because that's the principle that heads the new movement? Are we going to obey them and support them? Folk, it's happening. Nobody's going to stop it. And anybody who thinks they can, they're delusional. The leaders would teach that virtue is better than vice, but God being removed, they would place their dependence on human power, which without God is worthless. Their foundation would be built on the sand. Is money sand-like foundation, folk? Yeah, it is. It's here today and it goes tomorrow. How about position and power? Does that last forever? Did it last in Babylon? No, it disappears, friend. It disappears. The only thing that stands are the principles of truth. That's all that stands, folk. And Ellen White says their foundation would be built on the sand, and storm and tempest would sweep away the structure. Sweep away the structure. What's that, friends? Well, the structure is the organization, the conference offices, the hospitals, the schools. Says they will be swept away. Just like Herod's temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. The leadership in the first century said, stay in the church, stay in the temple. You'll be saved and you'll be protected. In great controversy, Ellen White says the leaders in the apostate Jewish church, as the Romans came into the temple, they were screaming at their people, stay in the building, God will deliver us. You're hearing that today, folk. Stay in the church, it'll protect you. And just like the Jews were protected in Herod's temple. The Adventist structure, friend, based on money and position, it's going to be wiped away. Why? Because the purpose for which it was raised up, they've gone exactly in the opposite direction. It was raised up for one reason only. That was the promotion and proclamation of the three angels' messages throughout the world. That's why it was raised up. It's not doing that, it will disappear. Review and Herald, finally the top quote, and we will close. Review and Herald, March 18, 1884. The Lord has a controversy with His professed people in these last days. When Ellen White uses the word professed people, who's she talking about? She's talking about Seventh-day Adventists. So the Lord has a controversy with Seventh-day Adventists in these last days. In this controversy, leaders, ministers, conference officials, men in responsible positions will take a course directly opposite to that pursued by Nehemiah. They will not only ignore and despise the Sabbath themselves, but they will try to keep it from others by burying it beneath the rubbish of custom and tradition. In churches, what churches is she talking about? Adventist churches. In Seventh-day Adventist churches and in large gatherings in the open air. What do you call large gatherings in the open air? Camp meetings. Camp meetings. Ministers. What kind of ministers? Adventist ministers. Ministers will urge upon the people. What people are they talking about? Adventist people. So Seventh-day Adventist ministers in Adventist churches and in camp meetings will urge Seventh-day Adventists of the necessity of keeping the first day of the week. Now, an Adventist minister knows where people are going if they keep the first day of the week. They know that, don't they? They know they're going to suffer the plagues. They know they're going to the lake of fire. So why would an Adventist minister urge Adventists to keep Sunday? Why would they do that? They have another leader. They want to save their job, and they want to save their paycheck. The love of money. There are calamities on sea and land. These calamities will increase one disaster closely upon another. The little band of conscientious Sabbath keepers will be pointed out as the ones who are bringing the wrath of God upon the world by their disregard of Sunday. We live in awesome times, folk. God has given us a truth that will never fail. It will never fail. It will always stand. I want to close with a psalm. Because as Paul saw the church in Jerusalem about to be destroyed and the temple about to be destroyed, Paul wrote the book of Hebrews to turn the people, and he said, don't look at a structure in Jerusalem. Don't look and say, this can save me. Paul said, look to the sanctuary in the sky. And I think that was David's thought when he wrote this psalm. It's Psalm 121. He said, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills. From whence cometh my help? My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. He shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. Praise the Lord. We can look unto the hills. The Lord is there to help and heal his children. God bless.